Hello. This is our last chapter, chapter 20, and I hope you're ready. It's going to be new stuff, and some of the artists are even still alive. It's so exciting. So, the political and economic shifts brought by the end of World War II meant that the US and the Soviet Union emerged as the world's powerful nations. This led to the Cold War. Although realism had dominated American art between the wars, some artists maintained interest in abstract and non-representational styles. New York artists of the 1940s began working in two approaches to abstract expressionism: action painting and color field painting. So here's our map of the world. We're just going to zip right by that. Maybe because of the chaos caused by the wars in Europe and the fact that many artists had fled, the USA and New York in particular became the center of the art world. This will be a quiz question. And here is Jackson Pollock doing a painting. Rudolf Burckhardt is the photographer, so don't get distracted by that. So Jackson Pollock was an action painter whose work was affected by Jungian analysis of his self-destructive personal problems. This is him working on a painting. So his method was to take raw canvas and place it on the floor. It's not stretched on a frame like artists normally work. And he would just put it on the floor, and then he would take regular house paint. So you can see what he has in his left hand there is just a gallon can of paint. And he would use brushes and sticks and whatever he had around to sort of dip into the paint and drip it over the canvas. He said about his painting, his technique, he said, "On the floor, I am more at ease. This way I can be in the painting. And when I am in the painting, I am not aware of what I am doing." It also reflects the tensions of the modern world with its capability of annihilation looming over us. So here's his painting, Autumn Rhythm. You will need to know the artist for the quiz. It was painted in 1950. It was painted by the technique I just described to you, dripping enamel house paints and conventional oils into graceful linear abstractions. The unself-conscious act of painting vented primal natural forces. His paintings have no subject or content, and that is what is meant by abstract expressionism. And just notice when you look at this, and I know you're all thinking, oh, I can do that. Of course you can do it. But he did it, and he did it first. And it was really because an art critic started talking about him and writing about him that he became really popular and famous. So if he had just done this and nobody paid any attention, it would be nothing. But it was the critic who really made the fame. So notice that his painting has a very limited palette. There's just like black and white and the natural color of the canvas in the background, and then sort of a beige color on it. And it's that limited palette that really helps give this a sense of unity, if you can say that. You can also see that this is evidence of his motions, of his arm movements. And I'll look at him again. So as he was down there, he might stay in one position and repeat a certain gesture over and over again, and that would create parallel lines. You can see some parallels down here. So that's just something to look for in Jackson Pollock. Curiously, his teacher was Thomas Hart Benton, whom I showed you in the last time. He did that Daniel Boone painting. So this is Lee Krasner. This was the wife of Jackson Pollock. She painted even after his death, so he died rather young and early, and created monumental, dazzling gestural paintings. So very similar somewhat in technique in that she painted on raw canvas and she's very gestural. But she is slightly more object-oriented than Pollock, creating a feel of landscape, but very, oh, sorry, I'm reading the wrong one. Bold sweeping curves express both grief and the forces of nature. So I think this is called The Seasons, and just looking at it, you can start to identify fruit shapes and like natural forms, unlike Pollock's, which is completely abstract. At least here, there's something that the viewer wants to identify and sees something in there. Now, here's Helen Frankenthaler, who's another abstract expressionist. She created more lyrical versions of action paintings with thinned paints resembling watercolors, and she also put her canvas on the floor and painted that way. Very large format paintings as well. This one is over 9 feet long. And she is more object-oriented than Pollock. She creates a feel of a landscape, but she's very loose and gestural. So when she says mountains and sea, that also gives the viewer a little bit of an entry point here, and then or a clue to how to read it. And you see that big blue form over on the right is possibly a body of water. I don't know how your reading would be without the title. That's another question completely. So here's another expressionist here, and this is Willem de Kooning. So a modernist convention has always been the notion that some artworks are more important than others because they are associated with high culture. And formalism is the close analysis of a work of art and critical judgments based on visual perception alone, as developed by Clement Greenberg. He was the critic who discovered Jackson Pollock. This means that there is no reference to context or subject, but only the manner and style of the paint application. So it was definitely in the 50s that the critics would just start talking about the painting itself and not what it represented or any external references. So this painting by Willem de Kooning now is a woman. He painted women in very abstract and unconventional ways. Woman 1 here was scraped and repainted about 200 times. So he wasn't really happy. He reworked this multiple times until he got it just the way he wanted. The image is very sexual, it's passionate, it's full of implied violence. He has a very gestural, abstract style, a ferocious looking woman here, almost like an ancient prehistoric fertility figure. About his art, de Kooning said, "Art never seems to make me peaceful or pure." And I think we can understand that. The next general division of painting is color field painting, and this is where artists would really avoid any recognizable objects at all. So oftentimes just filling a canvas with a solid color. So Mark Rothko is one of those artists, and we're going to look at him for a moment here. With little formal training, Mark Rothko began painting very large canvases with rectangular shapes in a vertical format. This painting that you see here, Untitled, is neither an arrangement of flat geometric shapes nor an atmospheric landscape. Color field painting is where large rectangular shapes interact vertically on a color field. They are ideas, Rothko said. He also said, "We profess spiritual kinship with primitive and archaic art." So there again is a parallel with things that we've seen in the past, starting with Gauguin and then the German expressionists wanting to sort of tap into this primitivism because it's pure, it's unadulterated. I think it's best to feel Rothko paintings viscerally, and they're very large format again, but just go and stand in front of one and just let the colors penetrate your retinas if you ever get that chance. So here's another one. These look really nice when projected on the wall. I'm sure they will look completely different on your laptop or computer. Heaven forbid you're looking at this on a telephone. And that's a link to the Rothko room, which is a room in the Phillips collection in Washington, D.C., which you can go to. You can visit if you ever get up to D.C. and if you like him. This is another artist, an abstract expressionist that I happen to like, and that's Clifford Still. So you can see he uses more form, different colors, contrasting shapes. So there's a little more interest there. And to me, it just always is a visceral experience does that feel right? Does it feel like that blue splotch belongs there? And, that's how I appreciate Clifford Still. And this is an Ellsworth Kelly, and I just include it because one of my students was a fan of Ellsworth Kelly, so I tossed this in for her. Now, in sculpture, we have a different look completely. This is David Smith, and he did a series called the QB series, and he's from the New York School. It included him and several other sculptors. His welded pieces in open forms that resembled drawings. I didn't say that. Somebody did. To me, they just look like a stack of blocks that children have put together and somehow managed to balance. But the QB series was determined by standardized pre-cut stainless steel sheets, and he welded them together and created these. Here's another statement that I didn't write. It says, the sculptures are surprisingly organic at closer range. And I think that statement is based on the fact that the surfaces have all been brushed so that there's like patterns of scratches on the surface, which I guess you could read as organic. Louise Nevelson developed an analytic cubist-inspired style, collecting discarded packing boxes to arrange objects painted in matte black. Sky Cathedral here, 1958. She started out in cubism but moved into abstract assemblages. And this Sky Cathedral could transform an ordinary space into a higher realm. Again, not my words. But what she did was assemble pieces. It looks to me like there's scraps of wood that she has put into cartons, into wooden crates or cartons, and arranged them and then sprayed the whole thing black. So it has a unity of color and it has a unity of form because everything is contained within some sort of a rectangular box type shape. So it really is not offensive, and it seems to be harmonious. It's an easy thing to look at. That's Louise Nevelson. Now we get to Robert Rauschenberg, and he developed a type of painting that sort of bursts out of a traditional rectangular frame, a canvas. So he produced what he called combines, where he was combining painting and sculpture. He produced controlled cerebral works that addressed issues in contemporary art. And he talked a lot about them. So, I mean, there's text that accompanies his work. His work is more intellectually complex. Oh, sorry. I keep skipping and reading the wrong one. Canyon includes a stuffed eagle and suspended old pillows in its rich disorder. His suggestive combines invite viewers to interpret. He employs paint, photos, found objects, and an assumption of meaning. And that means that there's recognizable pieces here. There's a photograph over here of a boy. There's obviously the bird and the pillow. And because there's things that the viewer recognizes, you start to make up a story or make them fit together somehow. And that's the assumption of meaning. So he leaves them open for you. He doesn't tell you explicitly what those mean or what it meant to him. And Jasper Johns here is a friend of Robert Rauschenberg's. He's more intellectually complex. His works are neither paintings nor sculptures. And his works often comment on the New York School and critics. I don't get that. I'm just reporting this. So this is called Target with Plaster Casts, and it includes plaster casts in boxes up above of human body parts with hinged lids on the boxes. The target itself is emphatically hierarchical. It's also recognizable, and you can recognize the body parts. I think it's kind of proto-pop, because the target is something that comes from pop culture, not really pop culture, but our culture with associated meanings of taking aim and hitting a bullseye and, being a sharpshooter. Here's another Jasper Johns. So this is what I mean by his proto-pop. He takes things that are recognizable and puts them in his artwork and sort of challenges you to interpret these, to draw some meaning from them. Now, Homage to New York here is from 1960. This was a work by Jean Tinguely, and one of the impulses of 20th century art is to go against this idea of a commodity or against the art market or putting prices on artwork. And so this is sort of where Tinguely is coming from here. Artists started to do performances and happenings that were events. They were one-time events that had no monetary value. They had no market value. They could not be resold. So it was like people would buy a ticket, would go to the art museum on a particular day to see this. And in this case, the Homage to New York was a collection of objects. Here he assembled a metal machine parts, a piano, a radio, a bassinet, and other devices. He painted everything white, and it was designed to destroy itself when activated. So somehow he turned it on, and the whole thing self-destroyed. So there was nothing left for the Museum of Modern Art to put on a shelf or to add to their collection. So it was an event, and that was all it was. At the end, there was a pile of rubble that I think went into the garbage. So this is a new art form. It's a happening. Next movement of art now is pop art. So you should be a little bit familiar with this, I think. So high and low culture are in the myth of modernism. The boundaries between high and low art blended in the 1960s when art such as Marcel Duchamp's Urinal was exhibited. I've already shown you that. Critics were fearful that the acknowledgement of commercial culture would threaten modern art and high culture. They really wanted to preserve that sense of the high culture. English artist Richard Hamilton here satirizes modern life and materialism in marketing campaigns and his collage, Today's Homes, it's got a very long title. Just what is it that makes today's home so different, so appealing? But it is a collage, so he owes something obviously to Picasso and to the Dada collage artists. But he's taking things that are crass and commercial. Images from comic books. There's a cover on the wall there of a romance comic book, of an ad from the back of a magazine or a comic book of this, this muscle man, like how to get strong, how to develop your physique. And on the coffee table, there's a canned ham. The woman at the top of the stairway is advertising a vacuum cleaner with a super long hose. I mean, it's all just crazy stuff, but he put it together as a criticism of our modern life, our modern commercial life. So this was the first pop art piece, and it wasn't the last. So several other artists joined this movement, but they all had their own little take on pop art. This is Roy Lichtenstein. So his deal was to take frames from comic books and enlarge them and turn just the individual frame into a huge painting. I mean, compared to the comic book, it's huge. It's 4 feet by 4 feet. And he chose frames that would be overly melodramatic, that he felt were just kind of ridiculous if you isolated them from the storyline. So he based his art on cartoon imagery using Ben-Day dots, and I've got an enlargement there so you can see that the half tone of her skin color was created by a bunch of little orange dots. So, Oh Jeff, I Love You Too, But is formally adjusted and tightened, putting an overblown episode into a work of high art. By the way, these images were not his original images. He actually lifted them out of somebody else's creation, the comic book, and he was sued for that, for copyright infringement. But he moved from this series into other series, and he had quite a long career. So that's Roy Lichtenstein, American. Another American is Andy Warhol. This one you're probably familiar with Andy Warhol. He dominated the pop art scene from the 1960s onward. His immense body of work included Brillo boxes, Campbell's soup cans, and Coca-Cola bottles in the print method of silkscreen, which is a mass production technique of making prints. This is his Marilyn diptych. It was made after Marilyn Monroe's apparent suicide. It rendered her features flatly and recalled religious art, because the only diptychs that we've seen in art history have been altarpieces, religious art. So is he implying here that she was worshipped? Possibly. But he's also commenting on how celebrities were commodified by the commercial culture. So she stopped being a human being, a normal human like you and I, and became a commodity that was produced and controlled by Hollywood, and people profited from that. A commodity like a Hershey bar or a bottle of Coke. Another pop artist is Claes Oldenburg. He's not American, he was Danish. He took a more humorous attitude towards consumer culture, and he does sculpture. So he takes objects from consumer culture and enlarges them, often making a soft object hard or a hard object soft. This is one that I think he is combining something masculine with something feminine in a very obviously phallic way, turning this lipstick into a phallus on these tank tracks. I think his original plan was that as this rolled along, that the lipstick was supposed to go up and down, like, coming out of a tube. That's Claes Oldenburg. And he's got a lot of humor in his work too, so he's really fun to look at. Now, minimalism and process art. Sculptor Donald Judd turned to minimalism, which reduced artworks to technical essentials. He evolved a formal vocabulary reduced to identical rectangular units, constructed of industrial materials that were arranged in rows. So this is what he did. He just created these identical rectangular pieces and stacked them up on top of each other. He wanted to eliminate the appearance of any human effort. So his goal was to make these look machine-made. I think he succeeded here. And another minimalist sculptor is Eva Hesse. She utilized her personal history in her minimalist creations. I don't know what that means. No title here takes on a different shape and size each time it is installed. So it's actually flexible. It's a group of ropes that have been dipped into latex. And so it has a semi-permanent feel to it, but it is very flexible. It hangs from hooks on the ceiling. And if this museum were to loan it to the Mint in Charlotte, it would come down off of its hooks, be put in a box, come down here and be hung up on a new set of hooks, and it would look very different. That was her idea, is this impermanence, this flexibility, this transience. So we're moving into conceptual art now. That Hesse is sort of the bridge into that. That's an idea. And Josef Kosuth here, this is, I think, one of the very first pieces of conceptual art. He abandoned painting to examine the conceptual intersection of language and vision. 1 and 3 chairs presents an actual chair, a photograph of a chair, and printed on that poster on the wall, the dictionary definition of chair. That's what it is. And this will also be on the quiz. You'll need to know it's conceptual art. And speaking of conceptual, this artist, Bruce Nauman, created a lot of conceptual art in many different forms, and this is just the one that you get in your book. It's a photograph, a self-portrait. I'm sure he set up his camera and a timer and then squirted water out of his mouth. Self-portrait is a fountain. So around this time, artists started staging happenings, like we saw, and performances as an evolution of Tinguely's Homage to New York and Duchamp's Fountain. Bruce Nauman created 11 color photographs based on wordplay and visual puns. Self-portrait as a fountain designates the artist as a work of art, recalling Duchamp's famous urinal. And there's the original fountain. It abstracts the very idea of what could be a fountain. So you might not remember, but that urinals, the title of that work was Fountain. And this is where I'm stopping the first part, and sorry, I'm rushing to get this up on Canvas today, so I don't have my end titles or anything here, but this is the end of part 1, and be sure to stay tuned for part 2 and part 3.